Welcome to the deep dive. Forget the endless scrolling. We're here to extract the crucial knowledge from, well, all that information overload.
That's the goal.
So today we're diving deep into the pressing environmental challenges facing us in 2025. Quite a topic.
A big one, definitely.
We've got a recent Earth.org report listing the 15 biggest issues, some fascinating research connecting corporate environmental responsibility with economic performance.
Yeah, how doing good for the planet might actually help the bottom line.
Exactly. And we'll also look ahead at Earth Day 2025. So our mission for you today is pretty clear.
Sick.
Get a solid grasp of the major environmental hurdles.
And also see how corporate actions and, our collective efforts all kind of link together.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start?
Well, the Earth.org report really lays it out. And what immediately grabs you is just the sheer scale.
Yeah.
And how interconnected all these environmental problems really are. It puts the pressure our planet is under into sharp focus.
Absolutely. And they kick off with climate change, driven by fossil fuels. The numbers are, well, they're stark, aren't they?
They really are.
2024 was officially the hottest year on record, even hotter than 2023. And it was the first time the global average temperature was a full 1.6 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels.
That 1.5 degree threshold we keep talking about.
Yeah.
We've crossed it for a year.
Right. And when we say pre-industrial, that's basically our baseline, Before we humans really started warming things up significantly, it's a critical marker.
And the greenhouse gases. CO2, methane, nitrous oxide.
All hit new record highs in 2023.
Yeah. And here's the part that really gives you pause. The report points out that even if we stopped all emissions, like right now,
Flipped a switch.
exactly, temperatures would still keep climbing for a while.
That's right. There's this lag, isn't there, in the climate system?
Yeah.
Past emissions have sort of locked in some future warming.
So the report just hammers home the urgent need for, dramatic emissions cuts, investing heavily in renewables.
And really phasing out fossil fuels.
Which naturally leads to their second point, our ongoing dependence on those very fossil fuels.
Yeah, the report calls the climate crisis partly a result of market failures. It mentions 27 countries have carbon taxes now.
Places like the EU, Canada, Singapore.
Right. But the suggestion is maybe they're not quite strong enough yet. The OECD thinks coal is still undertaxed, for example.
But there are positive signals.
Look at Sweden.
Ah, yes, the Swedish example.
They've got a hefty carbon tax, about $127 per ton. And since '95, their emissions are down 25%.
While their economy grew 75%. That's huge.
It really is. It shows that, environmental action and economic growth can go hand in hand. It's not necessarily one or the other.
That's a powerful counter-argument to the idea that environmental regs always kill economies.
Definitely. But the report also notes a challenge. International agreements like Paris. They're mostly voluntary, right?
Yeah, no real teeth if countries don't meet their targets. Exactly. So getting those deep global cuts needed to stay below, ideally, 1.5 degrees Celsius warming long term. It's still a big hurdle without binding consequences.
Okay, moving on. Another massive problem highlighted. Food waste.
Oh, this one's staggering.
A third of all food produced for humans. That's 1.3 billion tons every single year, wasted or lost.
It's enough food to feed 3 billion people. Just think about that.
And the climate impact. Get this. If food waste were its own country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter on the planet.
Wow. Right behind China and the U.S.
It just makes you think about the sheer inefficiency in the system.
And where it happens is interesting, too. The report says in developing countries, a lot of it is like post-harvest or during processing, about 40%.
Okay.
But in developed countries, it's flipped. About 40% happens at the retail and consumer level.
And often for just aesthetic reasons, like it doesn't look perfect.
Exactly. The report mentions over half the produce in the U.S. gets tossed because it's deemed too ugly. That's like 60 million tons of perfectly edible food.
Wow. Okay, next, biodiversity loss. This is truly alarming.
Yeah, the decline is steep.
There was a WWF report in 2020. It showed an average 68% drop average in populations of mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, amphibians.
Between 1970 and 2016.
Mostly because we're converting their habitats, mainly for agriculture.
And then you've got the illegal wildlife trade layered on top. Things like pangolins, sharks.
Pangolins are critically endangered now, aren't they?
They are. And the report talks about the sixth mass extinction really accelerating.
The rate of loss is what's terrifying.
It is. The report points out over 500 land animal species are right on the brink of extinction, likely gone within 20 years.
20 years.
That's the same number of species we lost in the entire last century. We're losing them that much faster now.
And climate change is pouring fuel on the fire.
Absolutely. Like the melting sea ice in Antarctica. It's threatening emperor penguins. Could wipe them out by 2100.
It's not just losing species, it's the whole web of life unraveling. Okay, let's talk plastic. Plastic pollution. Another colossal challenge.
The numbers are just astronomical. Annual production went from, what, 2 million tons in 1950?
To 419 million tons by 2015, and it's probably higher now.
And about 14 million tons of that ends up in the oceans every single year, harming wildlife, destroying habitats.
And the projection is that could hit 29 million tons a year by 2040, with microplastics just accumulating everywhere.
And the stat that always gets me, 91% of all plastic ever made has not been recycled.
91%. And it takes like 400 years to break down, maybe?
Something like that. It just persists. That's why the UN's push for a legally binding treaty is so important.
Even though the talks in Busan last November stalled a bit.
Yeah, didn't reach an agreement. More talks planned for 2025, I think. But it shows how tough international negotiation is, even on something so obviously critical.
It really does. Okay, deforestation, also happening at a terrifying speed.
The report uses a stark image. Forests the size of 300 football fields. Cut down every hour.
Every hour.
Wow.
And at this rate, projections suggest only 10% of forests might be left by 2030.
And they could be gone entirely in less than a century if things don't change.
The highest rates are where? Brazil, DRC, Indonesia.
That's right, and the Amazon rainforest. The world's largest, crucial for biodiversity. It's losing about 1.5 million hectares a year.
Mostly for agriculture again, livestock, crops like palm oil.
Yeah, that's the leading driver, and the knock-on effects are huge. Less carbon sequestration.
Right, forests soaking up CO2.
Exactly. Plus more soil erosion, increased landslide risk. It's all connected.
Then there's air pollution, a silent killer.
Affecting billions. The WHO estimates, 4.2 to 7 million deaths every year just from outdoor air pollution?
9 out of 10 people breathing polluted air. That's almost everyone.
It is. And the impact varies.
Yeah.
It's particularly bad in South Asia, where it can actually cut life expectancy by about 5 years.
5 years. And part of the problem is lack of infrastructure, lack of funding for monitoring, weak standards.
Limited open data, too. It's hard to fix what you can't properly measure. Even in Europe, an EEA report linked over 500,000 deaths to toxic pollutants.
It's a global health crisis hidden in plain sight.
Absolutely.
And then melting ice caps and sea level rise. We hear about this a lot, but the details are still shocking.
The Arctic is warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the planet.
And sea levels are rising more than twice as fast as they did for most of the 20th century.
The average global rise is now about 3.2 millimeters per year. Doesn't sound like much, but it adds up. Projections are around 0.7 meters, maybe more, by the end of the century.
And the big ice sheets, Greenland, Antarctica, they're losing mass incredibly fast.
Greenland lost, 60 billion tons of ice in just one summer back in 2020? Enough to raise sea levels 2.2 millimeters in 2 months.
And the record loss was 2019. 1 million tons a minute if all of Greenland's ice melts.
That's a 6-meter sea level rise.
Yeah.
Catastrophic.
And Antarctica's contributing about a third of the current global rise. Lost 7.5 trillion tons of ice since 1997.
We even saw Canada's last fully intact Arctic ice shelf collapse recently. Lost 40% of its area in 2 days.
The potential impact on coastal areas, it's terrifying. Climate Central suggests 340 to 480 million people could be displaced this century.
Hundreds of millions. Cities like Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh City, Manila, Dubai, extremely vulnerable.
It's hard to even comprehend the scale of disruption.
It really is.
Okay, another ocean issue, acidification.
Right. So as the planet warms, the oceans absorb more CO2 from the atmosphere. About 30%, actually.
Which sounds good initially, like it's helping buffer warming.
It does, temporarily.
Yeah.
But it changes the ocean's chemistry, makes it more acidic, the pH level drops.
And even small pH changes can mess things up.
Big time. Especially for marine ecosystems. Think about shellfish, corals, organisms that build shells or skeletons out of calcium carbonate.
Like oysters.
Exactly. Lower pH, more acidic water can literally start to dissolve their shells. It makes it much harder for them to build and maintain them.
And this is a huge threat to coral reefs.
Massive. We already see coral bleaching happening widely because of rising water temperatures. That's when the corals expel the algae living in their tissues, turning white.
Right, they lose their color and their main food source.
And ocean acidification makes it harder for them to rebuild their skeletons after a bleaching event, even if temperatures cool down again. Some projections say reefs could be completely wiped out by 2050.
Wiped out? Wow. And there might even be a link to plastic pollution making it worse.
Yeah, some research suggests bacteria and microorganisms growing on plastic debris might stress corals and contribute to bleaching too. It's all interconnected.
Okay, agriculture. We touched on it causing deforestation and biodiversity loss, but the report lists it as a major problem in its own right.
Absolutely. The global food system is responsible for up to a third of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions.
A third? That's huge.
Yeah, about 30% of that comes from livestock and fisheries. And then crop production releases nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas, mainly from fertilizers.
And think about the land use. Isn't something like 60% of agricultural land used for cattle ranching?
It is, even though cattle only provide about 24% of global meat consumption. It's incredibly inefficient in terms of land.
And water, too, right? Agriculture uses vast amounts of fresh water.
About 3/4 of the world's limited freshwater resources go to agriculture.
So we really need to fundamentally rethink how we produce food.
Definitely. Moving towards more sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and yes, probably shifting diets more towards plant-based options for many people.
Which connects to the next point, soil degradation.
Right. Healthy soil is crucial. It holds organic matter, what scientists call soil organic carbon, or SOC.
And that helps absorb carbon from the atmosphere, like a natural sponge.
Exactly. Healthy soil should have maybe 3–6% organic matter, but globally, levels are much lower.
And about 40% of the planet's soil is already degraded, according to the UN.
Yes, mostly due to human activities. Things like intensive tilling and traditional farming, overuse of chemicals.
And if this keeps up,
By 2050, an additional area the size of South America could be degraded.
which directly threatens food security, right? Especially with a growing population.
Absolutely. We might produce 40% less food in 20 years if soil health continues to decline, just as the population hits over 9 billion.
That's a terrifying prospect.
It puts everything under strain.
And all of this climate change, unsustainable farming, soil degradation feeds directly into food and water insecurity.
They're deeply intertwined. We're losing topsoil incredibly fast, over 68 billion tons a year eroded, apparently 100 times faster than nature can replenish it.
And that eroded soil often carries pollutants into waterways.
Right. Over-tilling, while maybe boosting productivity short-term, damages soil structure long-term and makes erosion worse.
Meanwhile, the FAO projects global food demand will increase 70% by 2050.
While over 820 million people already lacked sufficient food back in 2020, the gap is huge.
And water. Only 3% of the world's water is fresh water, and most of that is locked up in glaciers.
So about 1.1 billion people lack access to clean water. 2.7 billion face scarcity for at least 1 month a year.
And projections suggest 2/3 of the world's population might face water shortages by 2025. That's now.
It highlights the extreme urgency.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still related to consumption. Fast fashion and textile waste.
Another major environmental burden. The fashion industry accounts for a huge chunk of global carbon emissions, 10%.
More than aviation and shipping combined.
That's what the data suggests. And about 20% of global wastewater comes from textile dyeing and treatment.
And the waste, just mountains of it.
Around 92 million tons of textile waste every year, expected to hit 134 million tons by 2030.
And most of it isn't biodegradable, right? So it just sits in landfills.
Or gets dumped, often in developing countries.
Yeah.
Like those images from Chile's Atacama Desert. Just piles and piles of discarded clothes.
Leaching microplastics into the soil and water.
Exactly. And the fast fashion business model, cheap clothes, rapid turnover, low quality, just fuels this cycle.
There are efforts like the UN Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, aiming for net zero by 2050.
But the report suggests most businesses haven't really stepped up enough yet to address their role in the problem.
Needs a systemic shift there, too.
Definitely. Toward circularity, durability, responsible production.
Okay, nearly through the Earth.org list. Overfishing.
Critical issue. Over 3 billion people rely on fish as a primary protein source.
And about 12% of the world depends on fisheries for their livelihood, mostly small-scale fishers.
But about 30% of commercially fished waters are now classified as overfished, meaning we're taking fish out faster than they can reproduce.
And that has knock-on effects, right? Beyond just fish stocks.
Oh yeah. Increased algae blooms, destruction of marine communities, ocean litter from discarded gear, major biodiversity loss.
There are efforts by the UN and FAO for sustainable fishing levels.
And the WTO banned certain harmful fishing subsidies in 2022, things like fuel subsidies, that basically incentivize fishing beyond sustainable limits.
But clearly, stricter regulations and better enforcement are still needed.
Absolutely.
And the final point they raise, maybe a bit more specific, but important, cobalt mining.
Right. Cobalt is key for electric vehicle batteries, so demand is surging as we try to decarbonize transport.
But most of it comes from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah, and up to a fifth of that from artisanal miners, often working in really dangerous conditions.
Then there are significant environmental and social issues linked to it.
Big time. Worker exploitation is a major concern. Environmentally, these mining regions, particularly in southern DRC where there's also copper and uranium, have high radioactivity levels.
Pollution leaching into rivers, water sources.
Dust causing respiratory problems. It's a stark reminder that the transition to green energy isn't automatically clean or just. We need to manage the entire supply chain responsibly.
That's a really important point. The solutions can create their own problems if we're not careful.
Exactly. Sustainable sourcing, better battery tech, recycling, all crucial parts of the puzzle.
So that's, wow, a pretty comprehensive and frankly quite sobering overview from earth.org.
It really paints a picture of the interconnected crises we're facing.
But our deep dive doesn't stop there. We also looked at some research on corporate environmental responsibility, CER, and how it connects to economic performance.
Right. This study focused on Chinese steel companies, defining CER as basically companies taking ownership of their environmental costs.
Internalizing them.
And building sustainable development into how they manage production, aiming for an overall benefit.
Now, there have been conflicting views on this, haven't there? Does being green hurt the bottom line because it costs money, or does it help?
Exactly. Some argue it diverts resources. Others say it brings benefits like stakeholder support, reduced risks, attracting consumers, better capital market returns.
And this research, along with a growing body of evidence, seems to lean towards the positive, that CER can actually boost corporate performance.
Yes, it does. The study leans on a few established business ideas to explain why. Like stakeholder theory being responsible to everyone, including the environment, builds trust. Institutional theory, environmentally friendly practices boost a company's legitimacy. And the natural resource-based view stewardship can lead to advantages like efficiency and innovation.
So it's not just about feeling good, it can actually be good business.
That's the argument. It suggests environmental responsibility can be a driver of value, not just a cost center.
And this is where the concept of green reputation comes in. It seems really key.
Absolutely. Consumers are increasingly aware. They care about environmental protection.
So companies that actively show they're being responsible, that build a good external reputation.
Precisely. And that positive image, that green reputation, can then translate into better economic performance. Investors might favor you, consumers might choose you.
It acts like a signal that this company is well-managed, forward-thinking.
Kind of, yeah. And a good green reputation might even help buffer the impact if the company has some other negative news later on.
Interesting. So the study looked at Chinese steel companies from 2008 to 2017.
That's right. They used a pretty sophisticated economic model, SBM super efficiency, to measure CER.
And what did they find?
A significant positive link between CER and corporate economic performance specifically. They looked at industrial value added, or IVA.
So being greener led to better performance.
Yes. And interestingly, they found a lagged effect, meaning the benefits weren't always immediate. They might take a bit of time to fully kick in.
That makes sense. Building reputation takes time.
Exactly. And crucially, they found that green reputation, which they measured using environmental panel data, acted as a significant mediator. Meaning that a big part of how CER boosted economic performance was through building that positive green reputation.
Got it. So CER leads to green reputation, which leads to better performance.
That's the pathway they identified.
Did they find any differences based on region or ownership type?
They did. The positive effect via green reputation was there in both eastern and central western China, but it was stronger in the east.
Maybe reflecting higher environmental awareness or stricter regulations there?
That's likely the reason, yes. And regarding ownership, the mediating effect of green reputation was significant for state-owned enterprises.
Which might get more government support, but also more scrutiny?
Plausibly. But the effect wasn't statistically significant for the private enterprises in their sample.
Interesting distinction. So what are the takeaways from this for policymakers or businesses?
Well, for policymakers, it suggests designing policies that kind of nudge companies towards seeing both the environmental and economic benefits, promoting green management systems.
And for companies themselves.
The message seems clear. Actively take environmental responsibility. Don't just do the bare minimum. Be transparent about it, disclose environmental information, and consciously work on building and maintaining that green reputation. It can pay off.
It seems like smart business in the 21st century, really.
Increasingly so.
Okay, so we've seen the problems, and we've seen how corporations might be incentivized to be part of the solution. Now let's talk about collective awareness and action, focusing on Earth Day.
A really important global moment.
This coming Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025. It's the 55th anniversary.
55 years. It's incredible how it's grown. It's now the largest secular observance in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, uniting over 1 billion people in more than 190 countries. Amazing reach.
And the theme for 2025 is Our Power, Our Planet.
Focusing on what?
Really pushing for urgent collective action to shift the world to renewable energy, accelerating that transition.
Okay, so a clear energy focus.
Yes. There's an ambitious goal tied to it, aiming to triple the world's clean electricity generation capacity by 2030.
Triple by 2030. Wow. So focusing on solar, wind, hydro, geothermal.
All the key renewables needed for climate stability. And there's some momentum projections suggest renewables could hit 35% of global power generation by the end of this year, 2025.
That's encouraging progress. It's also good to remember last year's theme, right? Earth Day 2024 was planet versus plastics.
A very direct theme, focusing on plastic pollution, calling for that 60% reduction by 2040, promoting sustainable packaging, circular economy ideas.
It really helps keep specific issues in the spotlight year after year, and the history of Earth Day itself is fascinating.
It really is. Conceived by Senator Gaylord Nelson back in '69.
After that big oil spill off Santa Barbara, California.
Yeah, and he was inspired by the anti-war teach-ins that were happening on college campuses.
So the first Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970, 20 million Americans participated.
20 million. Taken to streets, parks, auditoriums, protesting environmental degradation. It was a massive grassroots mobilization.
And it had real impact, didn't it? Led to the creation of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency.
December 1970. And landmark laws like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, a lot came out of that initial momentum.
It really shows the power of public pressure. And then it went global.
Yeah. By its 20th anniversary in 1990, it was in over 140 countries. And it kept evolving. Its focus, clean energy, was central back in 2000 for the 30th anniversary.
It's become this enduring catalyst for environmental reform, a reminder of collective power.
That environmental decade of the 70s really set a lot in motion, and slogans like reduce, reuse, recycle became mainstream.
So what kind of initiatives are typical for Earth Day 2025?
You'll see the usual community cleanups, which are great for local engagement, educational events like the BBC often does live expeditions, advocacy campaigns pushing for policy changes.
Sustainability fairs, workshops.
Exactly. Focusing on things like the circular economy, low-carbon living, ways people can get involved practically.
And you mentioned earlier, corporations are getting involved too, integrating Earth Day into their sustainability work.
Increasingly, yes. It's becoming more embedded. You see companies like Starbucks with their Greener Stores initiative, Apple pushing for carbon neutrality.
NASA uses its unique vantage point to track Earth's health.
Right. Brands like ASICS doing eco-collections, Target focusing on circular design.
Even companies in tougher sectors, Leidos and Lowe's working on smarter grids and solar.
Sony, Kohler, Yum, brands, McDonald's focusing on biodiversity, waste reduction, sustainable sourcing. It shows a broader shift, hopefully beyond just PR.
A growing understanding that sustainability has to be part of the business strategy.
That seems to be the trend.
Of course, a lot of the initial push and ongoing pressure comes from the grassroots level, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Grassroots environmental activism is fundamental. It usually starts locally, focusing on specific, often acute, problems that communities are facing.
And it's about collective action, putting public pressure on officials, on corporations.
Exactly. And the environmental movement itself has evolved over time, from early conservation protecting parks for human use.
To this sort of environmental revolution of the 60s and 70s, driven by awareness of pollution, leading to those big laws and the first Earth Day.
And then the environmental justice movement emerging in the 80s.
Highlighting how environmental problems often disproportionately affect marginalized and underprivileged communities.
Yeah, that was a crucial shift in focus, recognizing the equity dimensions.
And there are so many inspiring examples of grassroots leaders.
Absolutely. People like Lois Gibbs at Love Canal, whose activism led to the Superfund program for cleaning up toxic sites.
Wangari Maathai and the Greenbelt movement in Kenya, planting millions of trees to fight deforestation.
Sarah James, Norma Cassie, Jonathan Solomon fighting to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, often recognized by the Goldman Environmental Prize, which itself was inspired by grassroots efforts.
And today's movement feels maybe more inclusive, more accessible.
I think so. It's certainly more global. And social media plays a huge role now, doesn't it?
Definitely. For organizing, spreading awareness, petitions, hashtags, getting stories out virally.
Public awareness is definitely higher. Pew Research found back in 2018 that climate change was seen as a major threat in about half the countries they surveyed. That number's likely higher now.
It really underscores that individuals can make a difference through participation.
Every voice, every action contributes.
So tying this all together, individual actions, corporate responsibility, grassroots movements, they all kind of feed into this bigger global framework, right? The Sustainable Development Goals.
Exactly. The SDGs, adopted by the UN back in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
A universal call to action, basically.
For people, planet, prosperity, peace, partnership. The 5 Ps. There are 17 goals, covering everything from poverty and hunger to climate action and inequality.
With specific targets and indicators, universally applicable, integrated.
And importantly, they really emphasize the role of local action, empowering cities, local governments to implement and monitor progress.
Because that's where a lot of the action happens on the ground.
Right. Decentralized cooperation, vertically integrated action, though challenges remain, like funding and monitoring capacity.
How are they different from the earlier Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs?
They're broader in scope, more ambitious, and crucially, they were created in a much more participatory way, involving lots of different stakeholders, not just governments.
And they cover environmental goals explicitly alongside social and economic ones.
Yes. Things like clean water and sanitation, Goal 6, affordable and clean energy, Goal 7, climate action, Goal 13, life below water, 14, life on land, 15.
And they're all interconnected, right? Action on one affects others.
That's a key principle. You can't really tackle poverty without addressing climate change or improve health without clean water. It requires a holistic approach.
So it provides that overarching framework for all these different efforts we've been discussing.
Exactly. It helps align actions globally.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive, quite a journey through the challenges and potential responses.
Definitely a lot to take in.
Several key themes really stand out, I think. First, just the sheer urgency and interconnectedness of the environmental problems highlighted for 2025. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. They're not separate issues.
They all feed into each other. Then there's the potential for corporate action. The idea that environmental responsibility isn't just ethical, but can actually be good for business, especially through building that green reputation.
Right. And the power of collective action, which is so vividly represented by Earth Day. It's a reminder, year after year, that awareness and mobilization matter.
And underpinning that, the ongoing importance of grassroots movements. Local action driving broader change. It's where so much starts.
And finally, having that global framework of the Sustainable Development Goals to guide and connect all these efforts towards a more sustainable and equitable future.
It brings it all together.
So gaining knowledge, understanding these connections like we've tried to do together today, that really is the crucial first step towards taking effective action, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Understanding the problem is key to finding solutions.
All right. So let's leave you, our listener, with one final thought to mull over. Considering the urgency of everything we've discussed, how can you personally integrate the principles behind corporate environmental responsibility, that idea of taking ownership and the spirit of collective action championed by Earth Day, into your own daily life? Even in what might seem like small ways, how can those small actions contribute to the larger shift towards a more sustainable future?
That's a great question to ponder.
Yeah.
What's your piece of the puzzle?